I wasn't supposed to hear it, but betrayal doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in whispers, tossed aside like scraps, sharp enough to cut deeper than a blade. And that night it came from my own grandson. My name is Harold Whitman, and I am 71 years old. Retired now, a widower these past 8 years, I've lived long enough to know that respect is not given freely. It's earned, built through decades of sacrifice. I built homes as a contractor, sweating under the sun for 40 years. I raised 2 children, put them through school, and carried my late wife through sickness until her last breath. I thought, foolishly, that those sacrifices would buy me a place of honor in my family's eyes. Instead, I sat at the edge of my daughter's living room that evening, a soft lamplight casting me in the corner, listening as my grandson, my blood, told his friends that I was just the old man in the corner. I felt the words like a kick to the chest. His friends chuckled. That cruel teenage laugh meant to cover awkwardness, but sharpened into mockery. I didn't need to look up to know my grandson, Ethan, smirked along with them. My daughter, busy in the kitchen, didn't hear it, but I did, and the sound settled into my bones like cold iron. You see, Ethan used to sit on my lap and beg for stories about when I was young. He used to hold my hand crossing the street, afraid of cars. He used to look at me as though I carried the weight of the world, and perhaps, in a way, I did. But boys grow into young men, and young men sometimes forget the hands that steadied them. I didn't say a word that night. Silence has its own power, and mine filled the room, even if no one noticed. I let the boys chatter about football, cars, and girls while I nursed my tea, my mind far from their careless noise. I thought about the years I had given to this family, about the dinners missed while I worked overtime so my children wouldn't know hunger, about the sweat-stained bills I paid without complaint, about the promises I made to my late wife, that I would keep the family strong after she was gone. And now? I was just the old man in the corner. After the boys left, I rose to leave. Ethan didn't bother to say goodbye. My daughter called from the kitchen, "Dad, drive safe," without even turning around. I stepped out into the night air, cold enough to sting, and sat behind the wheel of my car for a long while before starting the engine. It wasn't the first time Ethan had brushed me aside. I remembered last month when he introduced me to one of his friends at school. "This is my grandpa. He doesn't really do much anymore." He'd said it with a shrug, as though my 71 years of living were an empty ledger. I had laughed it off then, telling myself he didn't mean it. But tonight stripped away all my excuses. I drove home slowly, the headlights cutting through the dark, my thoughts heavier with every mile. Betrayal has a way of aging you twice in one night. By the time I unlocked the door to my quiet house, I felt every year pressing on my shoulders. The walls, lined with photographs of family, seemed to close in. There was Ethan at 5 years old with a fishing rod, beaming as he held up his first catch, a catch I'd baited, untangled, and guided. There he was at 10, standing proudly in the little treehouse I built with my own calloused hands. And there I was, smiling beside him. I stared at those photos for a long time, wondering if he remembered those days at all, or if, to him, they were just background noise, as disposable as the old man in the corner. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, the same one my wife used to curl up in when her bones ached, and thought about respect, about legacy, about the fragile thread of family that can be snapped by a careless word. And I thought about what it meant to be dismissed by your own blood. I was hurt, yes, but beneath the hurt, something else began to stir. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. A quiet resolve that whispered, "They may not see who you are now, but they will, for respect, once lost, can be demanded back. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth." And though Ethan did not know it, the truth was already waiting for him, closer than he could imagine. The next morning, I woke with the same heaviness I had carried to bed. At 71, mornings are usually my quiet salvation. Black coffee in a chipped mug, the newspaper folded neatly, the sound of sparrows in the yard. But that day, none of it comforted me. Ethan's words from the night before clung to me like a damp coat I couldn't take off. You don't raise a child, or help raise a grandchild, expecting perfection. You hope for kindness, for decency, for some trace of the love you poured into them to come back to you in small ways. That's what family is supposed to be, a circle of giving carried from one generation to the next. Ethan hadn't always been this way. When my wife was alive, she adored that boy. She'd knit him sweaters in winter, his initials stitched on the sleeve. I still remember the time he came running into our kitchen, no older than 6, waving a crayon drawing of the two of us with halos above our heads. "Grandma and Grandpa are my heroes," he'd said. We hung that paper on the fridge until the ink faded. Back then, Ethan and I were inseparable. I taught him how to bait a hook, how to hammer a nail straight, how to tie a knot tight enough to hold. He used to sit on my lap and listen to stories about my younger days, about the bridges I helped build, the houses I repaired, the storms I weathered. His eyes would shine like I was telling him tales of kings and warriors. But time changes children. By the time Ethan hit 13, he had traded fishing trips for football practice, our story nights for video games, and his phone. I didn't mind. It's the way of growing up. Still, I noticed the shift in his tone. When his friends came over, he stopped asking me to join in their games. He rolled his eyes when I told a joke. He sighed when I asked about his schoolwork. At first, I told myself it was adolescence, that sharp edge all teenagers wear like a badge. But as the years passed, the sharpness didn't dull, it cut deeper. He became embarrassed by me. The first time I noticed it, we were at his school's open house. One of his teachers saw me and said warmly, "You must be Ethan's grandfather. He talks about you often." I smiled, touched. But Ethan stepped in quickly, his cheeks red. "He's just here 'cause Mom made him. He doesn't really get it." The teacher laughed awkwardly, and I stood there, humiliated. Ethan didn't even glance at me. I let it go. Maybe he was nervous, I thought. Maybe he didn't want to seem childish in front of his friends. I told myself not to take it personally, but last night proved it wasn't just nerves. It was who he was becoming. Later that week, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I found Ethan in the driveway, bouncing a basketball, his headphones around his neck. "Ethan," I said, steady but calm, "can we talk for a moment?" He shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sure, Grandpa. What's up?" I looked him in the eyes, searching for the boy who used to clutch my hand. "Why did you say that to your friends? That I was just the old man in the corner?" He froze, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that? Grandpa, come on. I was joking. Nobody cares about that stuff." "It didn't sound like a joke," I replied. "It sounded like you were ashamed of me." He spun the ball on his finger, not meeting my eyes. "You take things too seriously. Times are different now. My friends don't get all that old school stuff. It's just easier to—" He cut himself off, then muttered, "Never mind." "Easier to what?" I pressed gently. "Easier to just, I don't know. Not make a big deal out of it. You wouldn't understand." That stung more than the words themselves. The dismissal, the wave of his hand as if 40 years of labor, of sacrifice, of living, were nothing more than dust to sweep aside. I stood quietly for a long moment, then said, "Ethan, respect isn't old school. It's the ground you stand on. Without it, everything else crumbles." He rolled his eyes, picking up the ball again. "Yeah, okay. Whatever, Grandpa." And just like that, the conversation was over. I walked back into the house with my chest tight. My daughter, busy cooking dinner, asked casually, "Everything okay out there?" I forced a smile. "Everything's fine." But inside, I knew it wasn't fine. Not anymore. That night, I sat again in my quiet living room, staring at the photographs. My wife's face looked back at me from a silver frame, her eyes soft and knowing. I whispered into the silence, "He's slipping away, Mary. Our boy's boy is slipping away." And though the house gave no answer, I could almost hear her voice in the stillness, steady and certain. "Do not let him forget who you are." Those words, imagined or not, rooted themselves deep in me. I would not beg for respect, but I would remind Ethan and the rest of them exactly who I was. And before long, an opportunity would come. A week passed, but Ethan's words still echoed in my head. They clung to me in quiet moments, while I raked leaves in the yard, while I read the morning paper, while I sat alone at the diner sipping coffee. Just the old man in the corner. I told myself not to let it fester. After all, a grandfather should have patience. But patience is not the same as blindness, and soon enough, Ethan proved that night hadn't been a careless slip. It was becoming a habit. It happened at my daughter's birthday dinner. She had invited the family and a few of Ethan's friends to a nice restaurant downtown, white tablecloths, soft piano music, the kind of place where conversation should carry warmth, not barbs. I wore my best jacket, a navy blazer my wife had once said made me look distinguished. I even polished my shoes because respect, I've always believed, is shown in the little things. The evening began pleasantly enough. My daughter beamed as we toasted her. The waiter poured wine. Laughter floated around the table. I watched Ethan out of the corner of my eye, hoping, foolishly, that he might offer me a smile, some small acknowledgement that I mattered to him. Instead, when one of his friends asked who I was, Ethan smirked. "That's just my grandpa," he said. "He doesn't really do much anymore. Just kinda sits around." The words dropped into the center of the table like a stone into water. His friends laughed, awkwardly at first, then openly. My daughter shot him a sharp look, but she didn't say anything. My son-in-law cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, but let the moment pass. And me? I felt my stomach twist. Humiliation has a weight of its own, pressing down until it steals your breath. I set my fork down quietly and reached for my glass of water, hoping the shaking in my hand wasn't visible. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to remind Ethan of the summers we spent together, of the times I drove him across town to his practices, of the sacrifices he couldn't begin to comprehend. But the words stuck in my throat. A public scolding would only feed his mockery, make me look like the bitter old man he already painted me to be. So I swallowed my pride with that sip of water and kept my silence. But silence, I've learned, can speak louder than rage. Later, when the cake was served and the laughter returned, I excused myself and stepped outside. The night air was cool, the city alive with sounds of passing cars and distant music. I leaned against the wall, my chest heavy. That's when my daughter found me. "Dad," she said softly, her arms folded, "I know Ethan can be difficult. Don't take it to heart. He's just a teenager." I looked at her, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, now a mother herself, brushing aside the way her own son had humiliated me. "Difficult?" I repeated. "He speaks of me like I'm already in the grave. Like I don't matter." She sighed, her voice tired. "He doesn't mean it. He's just trying to fit in with his friends." "And what do you mean?" I asked, sharper now. That I should accept being disrespected in my own family because it makes him look good? She hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe it's easier if you just let it go." Let it go. Those 3 words cut deeper than Ethan's laughter. My own daughter, who had watched me work my hands raw to keep a roof over her head, who had seen me sit beside her mother's hospital bed every single night until the end, telling me to let it go. I didn't argue. There was no point. Instead, I looked her in the eye and said, "Someday, Emily, you'll realize that letting go of respect is the first step to losing everything." I left the restaurant soon after. Alone, I walked several blocks before calling a cab. As the city lights blurred past the window, I thought about my place in this family. Once the pillar, now the shadow. Once the man they turned to, now the man they looked through. But shadows can stretch, and I had no intention of fading quietly. The following morning, while sorting through the mail, I came across a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the university downtown. At first I assumed it was junk, another request for donations, but when I opened it, my heart gave a strange lurch. Inside was an invitation, formal, embossed with gold lettering. The University of St. James was hosting their annual Founders Recognition Ceremony, honoring key contributors, builders, and donors whose work had shaped the institution. And there, written plainly, "We are proud to invite Mr. Harold Whitman as guest of honor, in recognition of his lifelong contributions to our community and his generous endowment toward the new engineering center." I sat very still, the paper trembling in my hands. My grandson might see just the old man in the corner, but the world beyond those walls knew me as something far different. A smile, small but fierce, tugged at my lips. Perhaps fate had a sense of timing after all, because what Ethan didn't yet know was that the very ceremony he bragged about attending, the one his friends had been boasting over, was the same stage where his old man in the corner would be standing in the spotlight. And when that day came, he would have no choice but to see me. The invitation sat on my desk for days, its gold lettering catching the light whenever I passed. I'd pick it up, run my fingers over the embossed seal, and set it back down again, as though testing whether it was real. Guest of honor. Not because of pity, not because of age, but because of what I had built. Decades earlier, I'd worked on the first wing of St. James University's Engineering Center, laying foundation stones with a crew of men half my age. Later, after I retired, I had set aside part of my savings to contribute to its expansion. Quietly, without telling even my family. It was my way of honoring the craft that had given me everything. My livelihood, my home, my family's security. I didn't need recognition then. But life, I've learned, has its own rhythm. And now recognition had come, not just as applause, but as a spotlight I had never asked for. I decided to keep it to myself, not out of spite, but out of strategy. If I revealed it now, Ethan would roll his eyes, dismiss it, perhaps even find a way to avoid the ceremony. No, it was better this way. Let him walk into that hall believing I was invisible. Let him hear the truth announced with the weight of microphones and applause. In the meantime, I prepared. I had my suit pressed, a charcoal gray one I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. I polished the same shoes again, this time until I could see my reflection in them. I even pulled out the old watch she'd given me on our 25th anniversary, its leather strap cracked but sturdy, much like myself. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Was I being petty? Was I using the ceremony as a weapon, turning recognition into revenge? My wife's voice came back to me, as it so often did in quiet moments. Dignity is not pride, Harold. Dignity is truth. Show it. Don't shout it. I nodded to the empty room, answering her ghost. I'll show it, Mary. I'll show him. A few evenings later, Ethan and I crossed paths again in the kitchen. He was rifling through the fridge, headphones around his neck, when he noticed me. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, his tone casual but distant. I watched him a moment before asking, "Excited about next week? Your friends still talking about the ceremony?" His eyes lit up in that cocky way only teenagers manage. "Yeah, it's supposed to be huge. The university president's gonna be there, all these big names. It's a pretty big deal," he grinned. "I told my friends I might get to meet some of the honorees. You know, actual important people. Actual important people." I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. "And what would you say if I told you you've already met one?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Sure, Grandpa. You building birdhouses in the backyard doesn't exactly count." The smirk stung, but I held my composure. "Sometimes the people you dismiss are the ones who built the ground you're standing on." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding or caring. "Okay, whatever that means." He grabbed a soda and started toward the stairs. "Ethan," I called after him, my voice firmer now. He turned, surprised. "Respect is not optional." Someday you'll see that he shrugged, popped the tab of his soda, and walked away without a word. That was confrontation number 2. Softer than I wanted, but sharper than the first. And though he dismissed me again, I felt something shift inside myself, because this time I didn't walk away defeated. I walked away with a secret, one that would not stay hidden much longer. In the days leading up to the ceremony, anticipation curled around me like smoke. I could almost see the moment play out. The lights, the crowd, the president of the university calling my name, and Ethan's face. The exact second when arrogance would collapse into realization. But even as I imagined it, I knew it wasn't just about humiliating him. It was about reclaiming my place, about proving, not just to Ethan, but to myself, that I had not lived these 71 years to fade quietly into a corner. The old man in the corner was about to step into the center of the stage. The week of the ceremony arrived, each day carrying with it a quiet storm of anticipation. I went about my routines as if nothing were different. Morning coffee, evening walks, small errands into town. On the surface, life looked ordinary, but inside I carried the weight of a secret ready to shatter the walls Ethan had built between us. The night before the event, my daughter hosted a small dinner for family. It was meant to be a warm gathering, but warmth, I've found, can feel like ice when respect is absent. Ethan strutted into the living room with 2 of his friends trailing behind him. I had never understood why my daughter allowed him to treat their home like a revolving door, but that evening I was grateful. His friends' presence meant witnesses. "So," one of them asked, "are you ready for the big ceremony tomorrow? My mom says the governor might even be there." Ethan puffed out his chest, grinning. "Yeah, it's going to be huge. My uncle knows some of the organizers. I'll probably get to shake hands with the president of the university." "And your grandpa?" his friend teased, glancing my way. "Is he going too?" For a flicker of a moment, I thought Ethan might say something kind. Instead, he smirked. "Nah, he wouldn't fit in. He's, well, he's just my grandpa. Doesn't really belong at that kind of event." The boys laughed, and my daughter, standing in the kitchen doorway, gave him a warning glance. "Ethan," she said, her tone sharp, "that's not funny." He shrugged, unbothered. "What?" "I'm not lying," I said, "nothing." I simply sat in my chair, hands folded, watching him the way a man watches a storm rolling in, knowing the lightning is close, knowing there's no stopping it. Later, as dishes clinked and conversation shifted, my son-in-law tried to lighten the mood. "Dad," he said, smiling, "don't take Ethan's teasing too hard." You know how kids are. I looked at him evenly. It isn't teasing if the laughter cuts. The room fell quiet. Ethan's friends shifted uncomfortably. My daughter hurried to change the subject, but the silence lingered like smoke after a fire. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. My wife's photograph sat on the nightstand, her eyes steady, her smile faint. "Tomorrow," I whispered to her picture. "Tomorrow he learns." The morning of the ceremony dawned bright, the autumn sun crisp against a cloudless sky. I rose early, my hands steady as I buttoned my gray suit. The watch slid onto my wrist, its cracked leather familiar, grounding. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not just an old man, but the man I had been all my life, worker, father, husband, builder, the man Ethan had chosen not to see. When I arrived at my daughter's house, Ethan was already dressed in his best, a slim black suit, hair slicked back, the kind of vanity only youth wears proudly. He barely looked at me as we climbed into the car. On the drive, his chatter filled the space. "It's going to be amazing." My friends are already saving seats near the front. I heard one of the honorees is some millionaire who built half the campus. Can you imagine? I smiled faintly, not taking my eyes off the road. "Yes," I murmured. "I can imagine." He didn't notice. He rarely did. As we pulled into the parking lot, crowds spilled across the lawn, students in pressed suits, faculty in gowns, dignitaries with cameras trailing them. Ethan's friends spotted him and waved eagerly. He leapt out of the car, barely waiting for the rest of us, and ran toward them. I stepped out slowly, adjusting my jacket, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me like a cloak. This was it. The stage was set. The audience gathered. Ethan was walking into his proudest moment, blissfully unaware that it would also be his most humbling. Inside the auditorium, the chatter was a constant hum. Programs rustled, lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice boomed across the hall. My family found their seats halfway down the aisle. Ethan sat with his friends, a few rows ahead, laughing, pointing at the stage like he already belonged to it. I sat silently, hands folded, waiting. Then the announcer's voice shifted, carrying new weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor the visionaries and builders whose contributions have shaped our great university. It is my privilege to introduce our guest of honor, a man whose decades of labor and generosity laid the very foundations we stand upon today. Please welcome Mr. Harold Whitman." For a moment the world held its breath. Applause erupted, echoing off the high ceilings. Heads turned, hands clapped, and all eyes found me as I rose from my seat. My daughter gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My son-in-law sat frozen, astonished. And Ethan's laughter died, mid-breath, his face blanching as though the ground had slipped from beneath him. I walked steadily down the aisle, each step measured, deliberate, carrying the weight not of age, but of vindication. The old man in the corner was gone. The man in the center of the stage had finally arrived. The applause washed over me like a tide, louder than I had ever imagined. My shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as I walked toward the stage, the spotlight following. For a moment I thought of my wife, how she would have smiled, how her hands would have clapped the loudest. I carried her with me as I climbed the steps, straightened my back, and turned to face the hall. The announcer shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Whitman," he said into the microphone, "today we honor not only your career as a builder, but your vision as a man who gave back to the community long after you set down your tools. The new Harold and Mary Whitman Engineering Center, set to open next spring, would not exist without your generosity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. A murmur spread like wind through leaves. Harold and Mary Whitman, my wife's name alongside mine, carved into the institution's future. I glanced toward the audience. My daughter's eyes brimmed with tears, her hand pressed to her heart. My son-in-law leaned forward, shaking his head in disbelief, as though seeing me for the first time. And Ethan, my grandson, sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his friends whispering furiously around him. He looked like a boy caught in a lie, every ounce of his arrogance stripped bare under the lights. The announcer handed me the microphone. My fingers curled around it, steady despite the tremor of emotion running through me. "I stand here humbled," I began, my voice filling the vast hall. "Not because I sought recognition, but because this community believed in building together. For 40 years I laid bricks, poured foundations, and built homes. When I retired, I thought my work was done. But I realized the work of building never ends. It only changes shape. And so I gave what I could to ensure that young men and women would have a place to learn, to innovate, to grow." Applause swelled again. I took a breath, my eyes sweeping the audience, landing, just for a moment, on Ethan. "We measure a life not by how long it lasts, but by what we leave behind. Respect, kindness, legacy. These are the beams and pillars that hold up more than buildings. They hold up families, communities, futures." The hall erupted. Students stood, clapping. Faculty members rose in ovation. The announcer smiled proudly, and the spotlight blazed hotter, brighter. And Ethan? His face was red now, his shoulders hunched, as if trying to shrink into his seat. His friends looked at him with wide eyes, no longer laughing. The grandson who had called me just the old man in the corner now had to watch as hundreds honored me with the reverence he had withheld. When the applause finally quieted, I stepped down from the podium. The announcer guided me to a front-row seat reserved with my name, a place of honor. My daughter squeezed my hand as I passed, whispering, "Dad, I had no idea." I leaned close, my voice low but firm, because it was never about telling. It was about doing. The rest of the ceremony blurred around me. Awards, speeches, recognitions. I heard the words, but my mind was fixed on Ethan. He didn't look at me once. He kept his eyes on the stage, jaw tight, shame written across every inch of him. When it was finally over, the crowd spilled into the lobby. People came to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me stories of how the university had shaped their lives. I accepted each with a quiet nod, humility carrying me even as pride stirred in my chest. It wasn't long before Ethan appeared. He hung back at first, his friends drifting away one by one until he was left standing alone, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, he walked toward me. "Grandpa," he said, his voice low, uncertain. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. This was the moment I had waited for. "Yes, Ethan?" I didn't know," he stammered. His bravado was gone, stripped away like leaves in winter. "I didn't know you did all this, that they'd name a whole building after you, that you mattered like that I studied him." My silence deliberate. Then I said, "You didn't need a building to know I mattered. You just needed respect." His cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was a crack in the wall he had built, and cracks, I knew, let the truth shine through. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift. The boy who had dismissed me as invisible was now struggling to stand beneath the weight of my presence. The old man in the corner was no longer a shadow. I was the cornerstone. The crowd eventually thinned, their voices fading into the autumn air outside the auditorium. The banners still hung proudly in the lobby, Founders' Recognition Ceremony, with my name etched beneath in bold print. My hand ached from the countless grips of strangers who now treated me as a pillar of the community. It was strange, after years of invisibility, to feel so vividly seen. But there was one conversation left unfinished. I found Ethan standing by the far wall, his suit jacket crumpled in his hands, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, as though the applause that had lifted me had pressed down on him instead. "Ethan," I said quietly. He flinched, then turned. His eyes were glassy, rimmed red, though he tried to mask it with a forced shrug. "Grandpa, look, I already said I'm sorry." I walked closer, slow and deliberate, until we were standing face to face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, people passed in twos and threes, their footsteps echoing off. The marble floor. It was as if the world had shrunk to just us two, the boy and the old man, the arrogant and the humbled. "Sorry," I repeated, my voice steady. "Do you know what that word means?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It means I regret it, that I shouldn't have said those things." I nodded, keeping my gaze locked on his. "Words are wind, Ethan. They come and go. Respect is not in what you say when you're cornered. It's in how you live. And you've lived these past months treating me like a burden, like my years, my sacrifices, my very presence were nothing." He swallowed hard, but stayed silent. I leaned a little closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You told your friends I was just the old man in the corner. Tonight, the world showed you who I am. But the truth is, I didn't need this ceremony, or that building, or applause. I needed my grandson to see me for the man I've always been." His lips trembled, and for the first time in years, he looked like that little boy clutching a fishing rod, desperate for my approval. "I do see you now," he whispered. "I swear, Grandpa, I do." I let the silence stretch before answering. "Then prove it. Not with speeches, not with empty apologies. Prove it every day, with respect, with gratitude, with the understanding that the people who came before you built the ground you stand on." He nodded quickly, his shoulders shaking. "I will. I promise I will." Behind us, my daughter approached, her face pale but determined. "Dad," she said softly, "I owe you an apology, too." I let his behavior slide. "I should have defended you. I should have taught him better." I turned to her, my expression gentler now. "Emily, respect begins in the home. If children don't see it taught, they won't learn it on their own. But tonight wasn't about blame. It was about truth." Tears welled in her eyes. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel the ache of years healed by the warmth of her arms. When she pulled away, Ethan stepped forward, tentative, hesitant. He opened his arms as if unsure whether he deserved to. I held his gaze for a long second, then embraced him. Not tightly, not fully. Just enough to let him know the door was not closed, but that he would have to walk through it himself. "Respect is earned, Ethan," I murmured against his shoulder. "You lost it. Now you have to build it back." When I released him, his eyes shone with something I hadn't seen in a long time: humility. We walked out together into the crisp night air. The banners fluttered above us, my name bold in the glow of the spotlights. Strangers still stopped to shake my hand, to thank me, to take photographs. Ethan stayed close, silent, his posture no longer cocky but protective, almost reverent. As we reached the car, I paused and looked back at the building, its tall glass windows gleaming. The Harold and Mary Whitman Engineering Center. My wife's name, my legacy, our work immortalized. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The old man in the corner had not only stepped into the light, he had ensured that the light would remain long after he was gone. And Ethan? He would carry that lesson with him forever, carved into the same ground he once thought I had no place in. The days after the ceremony passed in a blur. The university sent me photographs, glossy prints of myself standing at the podium, shaking hands, smiling beneath the bright lights. Local papers carried my name in their headlines. Neighbors stopped me on my morning walks to offer congratulations, and even old colleagues I hadn't seen in decades called to say they were proud. But it wasn't the applause that stayed with me. Applause fades, headlines turn yellow with time. What lingered was something quieter, heavier, the look in Ethan's eyes when he realized who I truly was, and the way he struggled to reconcile that with the careless words he had thrown at me. The week after, he came to my house alone. No friends, no laughter covering his nerves. Just Ethan standing awkwardly at my door, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Grandpa," he said when I let him in, "I was hoping maybe we could talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where his grandmother used to place warm biscuits on Sunday mornings. He glanced at her photograph on the wall, then looked down at his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respect. I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I didn't realize how much you carried. I guess I thought—" He trailed off, ashamed. "I thought you were just old. I didn't think about everything that came before I listened. Silent. Sometimes silence is harsher than interruption, and I wanted him to feel the weight of his own words. Finally, I said, "You thought being old meant being finished. But Ethan, age is not an erasure. Every year adds to the foundation. Without it, there would be nothing for you to stand on." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I don't deserve your forgiveness yet, but I want to try that, at least, was honest." So I told him, "Then start by remembering that respect isn't owed because of buildings or ceremonies. It's owed because every life, mine, yours, your parents', is built on someone else's sacrifice. Never forget that." For the first time in a long while, he looked at me not as a relic, but as a man. And though I knew it would take time to rebuild what had been broken, the first stone had been laid. That night, after he left, I sat alone in my armchair, the same chair where I had once whispered to my wife in the quiet hours, unsure how to carry the weight of betrayal. The house was silent, the air cool. I looked around at the photographs, at the faces of those I had raised, loved, and carried through storms, and I smiled. Not because victory was mine, but because dignity had been restored. Ethan had called me just the old man in the corner. But corners, I realized, hold up the walls. Without them, nothing stands. Now he knew that. And so did I. And so did I. And so did I. And so did I.